Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well, and got a subject tonight that Doug wanted to do, and it surprised me, Doug. We've actually never talked about the Shroud of Turin.
Right.
And
I was watching you reading some materials on this, and you were really getting into it, and I said, well, maybe I can get Rich to do a little bit of work for me and come up with a plan for a show. So that's what we're going to do tonight, is to discuss the Shroud of Turin, and I think we'll give you the conclusion first. I think we're sort of on board that it's genuine.
Yeah, I am inclined to accept that it is an authentic artifact, but there's all kinds of issues when you do that. There's all kinds of controversies over the decades that have come up, and we'll talk about all that stuff. And whatever you lean one way or the other, it does not impact me or you, Doug, as far as our Christian faith at all, because you don't just like I love it when archaeology or biblical texts confirm the scriptures as they're written. I don't use external or extraneous things to prove the Bible or that the scripture is true. Nevertheless, it's interesting, and some people it goes a long way to helping them. And so let's dive into it. And I guess for those who don't know what it is, and I think most people probably do, so we're going to go over this pretty fast. It is an image, and it's about 13 and a half, or it's about 14 by 3.5 feet in measurements. Okay, it's actually it's actually measured out in Jewish cubits, and that's kind of an interesting point of it. So we're going to talk about that. And so, what is it? It's a cloth that's purported to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, the original burial cloth. It's a shroud that covers both the front and the back, wrapped around him. There's also another cloth, which is interesting. I've only just recently, I've read stuff over the years, but not much about it. I really didn't know anything about it, and didn't put any stock or credence into this. It's called the sudarium, or something like that, and it's supposedly the head cloth, the piece that might have been put over his head and then taken off, and it's fascinating because we'll get into that a little bit, but not a lot. The wounds in that sudarium match the shroud's wounds pretty much exactly, including the type of blood that's on it, and so we'll get into all that stuff. But it's an image of a man who's about 5'10" and 176 pounds. And they've been able to restore that based on what they've seen in the image on there. There is no trace of bodily decomposition on the shroud, which is kind of interesting. On the right side, between the fourth and fifth ribs, there's an oval-shaped wound, which is about 4 centimeters long, and the blood from the wound is not coagulated, which indicates that the blood came from an already dead body. Okay. On the chest, back, and legs of the man, there are more than 100 markings. I've heard up to over 300. So it's just very bad. In other words, anybody seen the movie The Passion of the Christ? You couldn't watch it, could you? Or did you ever see it?
I didn't watch it, no.
Yeah, I've seen it, and that was so grievous. That really pales in insignificant. What the man in the shroud seemed to suffer is even worse than that, which is just really brutal. Okay. Anyway, but there's each of the marks they're smaller than an inch, inch large each one's, and they're it's caused by a tearing of the skin and bleeding under the skin. These wounds occur in groups of 2 and 3. It's what a flogging would indicate with a flagrum, which is a Roman implement of scourging, where you have like a wooden handle, and on the end you have leather thongs, and out you have bone or bits of metal or whatever, and they're on the ends and they whip you with it like that. So that's a horrible thing.
A terrible, cruel instrument.
I mean, a lot of people died under the scourging in what they've testified, some of their archaeological and historical records, just from the scourging, let alone going to a crucifixion. Okay, so below both shoulder blades and above the right shoulder blade appear to be large bruises, which have been attributed to the weight of a heavy and tough object, perhaps the heavy crossbeam convicted prisoners were forced to carry in the Roman crucifixion torture. Nail wounds on the hand and feet correspond to a crucified victim, including the pattern on the forearms and legs. The thumb is hidden. It's kind of over. You got it's like this, and the arms are crossed like this, and so it's hidden, and it seems to be medical doctors are going to do that. I read a lot about the medical, that when you get hit in the wrist, which is where the wound of this victim is, causing a median nerve to get hit, causing the thumb to constrict inside. So this is kind of a very anatomically correct thing or image of a crucified man. The cool thing about this, though, I'm sorry, there's one other thing. The traces of soil mixed with blood were found on the knee and foot imprints, okay? And this is something I've just been reading about a little bit more. Samples taken from the imprint of the right foot match the limestone found in the Middle Eastern areas, okay?
So when he stumbled...
Yes, that's what they're thinking, yeah. Okay, that's that. A lot of things, if this is a forgery, which has been purported, and that's been a lot of the controversy, we'll get into the other stuff, why they think that. It is one of the most amazing forgeries that a person could have ever come up with. So as I said, the full length is 14 by 3.5 feet, and it became known in historical times in the mid 14th century. Okay, this is what the controversy comes in. We don't know so that means what happened with the first 1,300 years.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and quite frankly, no one knows for sure. There is traceable, but sketchy inferences that it went from a certain place. We'll get into that a little bit, and people have made cases for it, but it's speculative, and you got to acknowledge that. All right. So what happened is, and I'll just read this, okay? In the 1350s, it was actually 1353 or something like that, 1358, a French knight named Geoffrey de Charnay presented it to the dean of the Church of Liry as Jesus' authentic burial shroud. But interesting now, the controversy starts very early on.
Right.
All right? Around 1389, which is about 30 years, 30, 40 years after this, Pierre d'Arcis, the Bishop of Troyes, France, sent a report to Pope Clement VII, claiming that an artist had confessed to forging the shroud. Furthermore, d'Arcis claimed the dean of the Liry Church knew that it was a fake, and that had used it to raise money anyway. Now, in response, the Pope declared the shroud wasn't the true burial cloth of Christ. Still, he said the Liry Church could continue to display it if it acknowledged the cloth was a man-made religious icon, not an historic relic. Okay? And we know all about Catholic relics. Okay? This is what really gets you suspicious. Okay?
Yeah, right. The problem with a relic of this sort, which is probably genuine, is that the other relics, that the splinters of the cross.
The joke is, if I put together all the fragments of the true cross, I'd have over 300 crosses. Sometimes I've heard even a lot more than that. But the point of it is that, and there are a lot of relics. This is the burial cloth of this, or the knuckle bone of Saint Francis, or there's all kinds of stuff like this. And you have all kinds of weird stories. When I was growing up, Doug, I had stories of statues that would bleed, and hosts that would be cut and they'd bleed. I mean,
and the Weeping Mary, and
all kinds of stuff. And of course, and the people who are into Mariology, all the stuff, the Miracle at Lourdes, and all these other ones, which are very, very, to me, spurious. Things do happen, but that doesn't give them the credibility. This one is quite a bit different. And of course, I've always said before, one good way to disprove something is to put a lot of ringers in that are obviously false. Doug, we ran into that with the Paluxy River tracks.
Mm-hmm.
There are obviously, we believe they're authentic. Okay? We've seen the tracks with cross cuts in them.
Right.
And you can see the compression of the dinosaur footprint and the human foot. That's a lot different than somebody who's carving a track where the matrix stays consistent. There's no compression. It's all, the matrix of the rock is intact. You could tell that. But the problem is the damage is done. Mm-hmm. See, there's fake tracks. And so people who are ignorant in their things say it's all fake.
Yeah.
And this is the tendency. We have to really watch ourselves not to accept everything carte blanche, but not to reject everything either carte blanche, because that's what people do. They don't want to be taken as gullible so much, or may play it like a fool, that they will do anything just to destroy it all. Just basically, it's not credible. None of it is. So, Anyway.
But the shroud was almost lost in the fire, apparently.
Yes, well, listen, around 1388, oh no, I already talked about that, but before the shroud was moved to Turin, it was almost, you're right, it was almost lost in a fire. And in fact, if you look at the picture of the shroud, you can see there's like 4 patches that are triangular shaped, long and dry on each side of the figure's on his elbows. Okay, they're on each side and on the bottom. And the thing is, that was a fire, we know, and they sewed patches in there to repair it back in the middle, back in the 1300s, 1400s. Anyway, so that everyone's known that for a long time. Silver actually went in there because the cloth was folded in sections. So it went in the corner, and that's what happened. Yeah, that was so 1502 is when that happened. The House of Savoy, and they placed it in the Saint Chapelle in Chambéry, which is now a part of France. In 1532, the fire broke out in the chapel. Sorry, so it wasn't 1502, 1532. It melted part of the silver in the container, protecting the shroud, and this silver fell into part of the shroud, burning through it. The burn marks and the water stains from where the fire was extinguished are still visible today. Okay? In 1578, the House of Savoy moved the shroud to the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, which later became part of Italy, and it has remained there ever since, with the exception of World War II, when Italy relocated it for safekeeping. So that's sort of the history up until that point. And of course, we alluded to this earlier, Doug. Many theories have arisen as to the whereabouts of the shroud before the 1300s, because that's when historically it becomes common knowledge or pretty well known. It has a somewhat traceable history from Jerusalem to Lyre, France, through Edessa, Turkey, and Constantinople. And I've read some of those. We're not going to go into that tonight. It's fascinating, the speculation, and it seems fairly reasonable, but again, we can't do it. Some of the stuff that's interesting about it, Doug, is in the very early renderings of Jesus' face was sort of pictorial in a lot of different ways. Young man, but after a certain point, which is fairly early on, like in the 300-400s or so, the image of Christ began to be very standardized, and much of that looks like the shroud's face.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a mark on the middle of the head. There's sometimes the inverted 3 on the blood stain. There's the way the double beard, the way the whole thing is done looks very similar to it that an artist might do. But you got to understand, the shroud itself, and we talked about it, you look at it, and it's a very faint brownish stains when you look at it. And it's actually a negative. And that's the second part here that's very interesting. In 1898, a guy named Secondo Pia took the first photographs of the shroud. Okay? And the negative revealed a startling positive image of the man embedded in the shroud. And that's what we're going to show here. The shroud, the man, you can see him. It's a total, the actual positive image, the one you're seeing when you're just looking at it, is actually a negative image. This is a very, Secondo Pia, I read, he actually dropped his plate and he screamed out because he saw this face of the man looking at him. Yeah. Now, I was raised Catholic, Doug, and I remember being raised on something called Veronica's Veil. And no Protestant ever has heard of this. But if you look at the Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, there's a very small thing there where a woman wipes the face on Jesus, and supposedly the image of Christ's face shows up on it. That's Veronica's Veil, okay? There's no evidence of that whatsoever, except insofar as people have postulated and speculated perhaps when the shroud was folded up, only the face could have been revealed. Because the word Veronica literally means true image. That's all it means in the Latin. Veracity, and icon, Veronica. So it means true image. So is that where the legend come from? I don't know. But it seems it could be that's again a reasonable speculation, but I'm not going to say with any sense of dogmatic that's where it came from. The pseudarium is actually a totally different thing. There's no image on that cloth, and it's stored in another location. But what's fascinating is the blood stains match the shroud's blood stains, and even the type of blood matches, AB positive. Okay.
So we had a few studies done on the shroud, scientific studies.
Yes.
And when did they take place?
The first one, the first major one that came out in 1978, and it was it's called STIRP, the Shroud. Let's see, let's see if I can remember.
Shroud of Turin
Research Project. Yeah, so it's called STIRP. Okay, and so the markings and they said the markings of the cloths were consistent with a crucified body, and that the stains were real human blood. And the real human blood part of it has really caused a lot of controversy until fairly recently. Okay, and in 1988, this is the second major controversy, and this pretty much killed it for me and pretty much everybody else. Although I was disappointed, but I said, okay, and it was the carbon-14 test that was taken in 1988. Okay, carbon-14 was taken. Of course, one group of scientists said that their analysis showed the shroud originated between 1280 and 1390. But another said that their analysis showed it originated between 300 BC and AD 400. That's a lot bigger window. And in 2018, researchers used forensic techniques to argue that the bloodstains in the shroud couldn't have come from Christ. So say, this is 2018. We got more information more recent than that. Okay? So most of the things that are debunking the shroud are using pretty much outdated arguments. Okay? Right. The carbon-14 and the blood argument are the two major ones.
Well, let's deal with the carbon-14.
We're going to deal with them. So what about the 1988 carbon-14 dating that placed it in the 13th century? All right?
Well, we found out that the sample that was taken, one of the problems with carbon-14 is that when you do the test, you destroy the sample in the process.
Unfortunately, yes.
And so they wanted to be very careful to take as very little of a sample as possible.
It was about a section like that, maybe a little bit longer, and they cut it in 3 pieces. Okay.
But unfortunately, I think it was taken from the spot where they repaired the shroud.
Actually, it was taken from the outer edge, which was again. You're right, though, Doug. It was because of part of the repair, because it was damaged, and they wanted to. And it's interesting because in recent days, they've actually analyzed, and they found cotton fibers sewn up in the edge of the fringe and of other parts of the cloth. They see that and they go, well, this was definitely done after the fire broke out. Right. Yes, so you're right. Exactly. They didn't take it from the triangular pieces, but they took it from the outer edge of the cloth, as I understand it. So, it was from a single sample taken from a single location. All right. The outer fringe, which has been shown to have been, as I said, interwoven with cotton fibers from the 13th to the 14th centuries. So this is why it's been contaminated.
Yeah.
And we've known about we like carbon-14. We think it's a valid test, but all too often
carbon-14 is the creationist's friend.
It is,
because you date things like coal and limestone and diamonds.
The matrix of coal and diamonds, yes. And we could at carbon-14, we're finding them in dinosaur bones, which you should never find anything in that if it's been fossilized. These are unfossilized bones. So anyway, as I say, this location, the outer fringe, again, as you said, Doug, is done to the shroud after the fire of 1352. So anyway, so that, and then the blood part of it, I was going to get to that a little bit later. We can talk about that now if you want to, Doug. We're talking about the evidence that try to debunk the shroud. The real problem with a lot of it is, how can you have real blood that's still red? Blood turns brown very shortly after an oxidation.
Right.
And but something very interesting happened. And this, by the way, there's a Jewish scholar who just analyzed this. I can't think of his name offhand. And he was a skeptic, and mainly because of this blood thing. He says that has to be fake, or even if it's real blood, it can't be real blood. It's still bright red, or it's not brown. But what they found out is about the blood stains. It's very fascinating, Doug. Let's go there. Are the blood stains real? I got a category. The blood on the shroud, number one, is the rare AB plus, A positive, same type that is found on another cloth purported to be the head covering. We talked about the sudarium. The cloth has the secondary cloth has no image, okay, being removed before the burial. In fact, some people think it might be the extra cloth that was off to the side that John talks about in his gospel. We don't know that for sure, but it could be. But blood plasma found around the blood stains is revealed under ultraviolet light, and that's fascinating. blood plasma. That's that pericardial fluid. Remember when John's gospel says, when Jesus, they stabbed the spear in him, and out comes blood and water.
Right.
When your heart stops beating, basically the mixture of the hemoglobin and the pericardial fluid, which is really a watery, clear serum type thing, separate. The hemoglobin goes to the bottom and the watery stuff goes to the top. So even though I think most medieval scholars believe that this was sort of a miracle, it's actually proof that Jesus was dead.
Yeah.
It's actually a proof that he had actually died. And that's really, really cool. But further on, it's even more interesting. So, the other part, which we got the blood plasma is revealed under ultraviolet light. You can't really see it clearly in just regular light. So, but that's something that's recently been shown. The stains match the gospel descriptions of the Passion of Jesus. Now, about the redness of the blood. All right, blood particles reveal a high content of what's called bilirubin, which is very significant for two reasons. It is consistent with bodily response to extreme trauma, eliminating the possibility of using a dead body to produce the image.
Yeah.
In other words, putting a dead body in there is not going to happen.
Right.
You're not going to get red blood. Also, blood with a high bilirubin content stays bright red over time and does not ever turn dark brown. This is consistent with the stains on the shroud.
Wow.
That was something that this Jewish scholar said that even he's not a Christian. He's not definitely not a Catholic. But that said, this looks pretty good. He did not know about the bilirubin and the particles, and we have pictures of some of the blood stains as well. Okay.
So there's some external evidence as well?
Yeah, some of the stuff that I want to talk about is really interesting too. Is there's stuff that's on the shroud and external evidence. And we wanted to know what evidence is there that makes the cloth consistent with the first century origins. So what facts are consistent? And number one, the composition of the cloth, the material of the threads are consistent with known first century plants. Okay, the fiber that were used. Okay, which was not the cotton threads, which were the other ones. The herringbone pattern of the shroud is a known pattern and documented in other first century textiles, which I think that's pretty cool. So these are not proof positive things. They're just consistently consistent. Okay. The faults, and I put that in quotation marks because it's very which are found in the weave. These are sort of like when they make a mistake and they correct it in the middle of weaving it. It's very consistent with first century techniques. I guess we have all this stuff. Okay, the dimensions of the cloth. I gave you the 14 foot by 3.5 feet, but actually its measurement fits the Jewish law. Is match the cubit measurement. Okay, in Jewish law and custom for a burial cloth. Okay, so we have external things.
Like pollen grains?
Yes. We have pollen grains that have been embedded in the shroud that are consistent, that are unique to Judea. They're not found anywhere else. They're not found anyplace else. There seems to be, and I've seen these pictures, and you can see them, but they've got much more better. The pictures I'm using are not as good. But there seems to be evidence of Roman coins on the eyes of the image, which is sometimes a dead body, they would put coins on them. I'm not sure exactly. I've read about why they did it, but I couldn't tell you offhand what it is. They can find dates on it that look like they were minted by Pontius Pilate in 29 AD. So that'd be interesting. Again, it corresponds with the other relic, the Sudarium Christi, which has similar pollen grains, by the way. And I didn't know that. There's 124 exact matches to wounds on the shroud, and they also have the same AB blood type. At least 4 other dating methods have been used on the shroud, and the results indicate an average age of 50 AD plus or minus 200 years, a 96% coincidence level.
Did they say what kind of dating methods they use?
There is one I listed. There's only one that I looked up, and it was. See if I can find it here. It's kind of an interesting scanning technique they did.
Wide angle X-ray scattering?
Yes, that one. Yeah, where'd you find that at?
Right at the bottom.
The very bottom. Oh, yeah. It's a wide angle X-ray scattering, which I'm not exactly telling you that I'm not sure what that is, but recently dated the shroud to the 1st century. But the interesting thing is, Raw data from the carbon tests have been recently released after 29 years by a Freedom of Information Action. It's revealed that the tests were not definitive at all, which we've already known. That's why the debunking has been debunked. Okay? This fact is confirmed by historical research indicating the shroud was around long before the carbon date that dated it in the Middle Ages. Okay, and I said the evidence has been further dated.
So what is so special and mysterious about that image?
This is what's really fascinating, and I think most people who have any modicum of information about it, there's no other image known that's like it. And it has not ever been duplicated even by modern techniques. The shroud is a precise photographic negative on a non-photographically sensitive cloth, revealed first by the photographer Secundo Pia.
There are no paints or dyes or...
The image has not been created by using paint, dyes, vapors, or scorching. That won't work. The image is restricted to the uppermost part of the fibrils, okay? There's no penetration of the cloth as there would be with paint or any other medium. The blood imprints precede the formation of the image. In other words, they were on there first, and they do penetrate.
Yeah.
And the image does not go beyond the bloodstains, okay? 3D imaging of the shroud reveals bones inside of the hands and flesh surrounding the bone, including the teeth. You can see that. This has been used to create a three-dimensional sculpture. There's been 3D imaging that's been able to do that.
So basically what really happened at the resurrection was Jesus rose, when he rose from the dead, he actually came through the cloth and created that
Yeah,
image.
in fact, the most recent postulation, and we may have another, is it was a burst of some kind of electromagnetic radiation, a mysterious burst of light. Basically, I'll read it. The bottom line is the image has shown, or the science has shown the image on the cloth is an impossible image, one that cannot be replicated. One of the main reasons is, as scientists have now confirmed, the image on the shroud has to be caused by a mysterious burst of light. That is electromagnetic radiation. In short,
Amazing.
the evidence indicates the shroud was wrapped around a real body that simply dematerialized without disturbing the perfectly formed blood clots on the cloth, which would have happened if anybody moved the body at all. That could only happen through an event like that described in the Gospels as the resurrection. An event that, as the Gospels state, freed Jesus' body from material constraints.
So what do we do with this, Rich?
I think what we do is say, that's really cool. What does the gospel say? You know what I mean?
That's right, yeah.
Basically, what does the scripture say? Because
that's really saying, and with a piece of evidence, that the scriptures are pretty much genuine, and well, they are genuine.
we are presuppositionalists in the sense we presuppose the scripture is true without any of this. But we have no problem using evidential arguments to bolster up what we already know to be true. If it wasn't true, it wouldn't hurt my faith one bit. And some people might think, well, you're just nothing I can do to get through to you. I says, well, not in that way. I've had the Holy Spirit has changed me. And so that is the evidence I need. But this is fine. It corroborates it. It also helps for people who are not as strong in presuppositional things. It might help them remove obstacles to faith, and I think that's a valid thing to use.
It's kind of like a piton for the mountain climber.
That's right.
Up the...
You use my. That's what I use. I love that. That's exactly right.
Ching, ching, ching. I got
Mountain climbing
something
pitons, man, helps you falling your death. Yep.
So we hope you enjoyed our show about the Shroud of Turin. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.